So Richard is my co-worker and co-contributor to this talk. We're trying this as a sort of a multimedia attempt, which we hope will hang together. We're going to show some sonograms it's sort of essential to the argument that I'm putting to look at some sonograms of calls. And it's a bit difficult to do it all at once, so we're going to do that on a big 2D, but that'll be towards the end of the talk. So, and also I want to make it clear that I'm not per se opposed to wind farms. I just think you need to be very careful where you put them, and I think where the present race to get as many wind farms in operation as possible. I don't know what it's like down south, but in Queensland it is unplanned and chaotic, and they're putting wind farms in some of the very valuable high biodiversity habitat, and I think that is an absolute disaster. I'm astounded that it's been so ill planned and ill controlled. I mean, it is just absurd. Anyway, so there are currently about 3,000 wind turbine proposals sort of between here and the New South Wales border. So that's about one wind turbine every 500 metres, I think. So it's an impressive number of wind farms. And most of them are vested. I mean, this is a photograph of Stephen Nowakowski's out at Turbine Wind Farm, which is the nearest, probably the second commission. Mount Emerald was commissioned first. This one they sort of snuck it through. There was very little knowledge of it, and suddenly it was there. So it's hard to judge the scale of wind turbines unless even when you're standing near them. But these things are a very recent model. The tower's about 225 metres. The blade length is about 85 metres. Each blade weighs about 3 tonne. There's just in there's a gearbox which weighs 55 tonne. Hell of a place to service a gearbox. So they're about a 5.6 megawatt wind farm, extremely powerful. Able any energy production per year, maximum potential production, is about 17,000 megawatt hours. So it's an extremely, I think Mount Emerald is getting less than half of that. I mean, Mount Emerald is ranked at about an 18,000 megawatt hour wind farm, and I think it's producing about half of that. It's not a particularly windy place up here, but that doesn't. The other point is they're always deceptive as to how, if you see them on Mount Emerald and that, they look like the blade is leisurely turning around. But if you measure the time, and we've done a lot of that, the tip of the blade is doing about 160 k. So you've got this huge weight going around in air, so it's no wonder it makes noise. And the wind farms proprietors and proponents are very shy to talk about that. It's not, none of their, you might know of their PERS, their public environment reports. The subject is not even raised. The only noise they talk about is the noise of construction, and they take pains to tell you how much they worry about that. Anyway, most of these areas are, they're over 900 metres, 900 to 1,200 metres, very high biodiversity. There's probably about 30 mammal species in the Bluff Forest. This is in the Bluff Forest. Probably 30 mammal species, over 100 birds, a lot of reptiles, a lot of frogs. We pick up a lot of frogs in our recorders. The environmental impact studies they did were fast. If one consultant didn't give them the result they liked, they changed consultants. Anyway, to get on with the talk. So a lot of wind plans what of wind turbines are planned for these upland eucalypt woodlands? The modelling suggests that in the hotter future that we're facing, the lowland populations of koalas probably won't survive. I mean, koalas are not too comfortable when it gets hot. I'm not really sure how the ones that live out west survive 45 degrees. I suspect they must get in the river or something, but normally koalas do not deal very well with high temperature. But they seem to have the modelling suggests they'll have a much better chance in the cooler upland forests. And I mean, I'm talking about this. This is from Bisco's paper. I'll show you the reference in a minute. But their modelling suggested that these would be the places that koalas would probably survive in Queensland in 50 years' time. They didn't model fire frequency, but we know that fire frequency intensity is increasing, and I mean all of these places, probably up as far as the tropic, are going to have a much higher fire frequency. So where it leaves both trends really highlight the importance of this place. It's got it's high altitude, but the most important thing is that it's a summer rainfall. So we may even be getting longer wet season, judging on the last few months. But these northern populations may be quite crucial for the long-term conservation of koalas in Queensland. And the Queensland government doesn't spend any money up here. They only spend money on koalas in southeast Queensland. So that's where all the voters are. Oh, that's the paper by Nat Briscoe and her colleagues. When we'll put a clip of this talk on the TKMG site. All of these references will be on it. If you want to read any further, they'll be, I know you have trouble reading that, but if you want to read them, they'll be on that site, so you can just get the reference from them. So I'll do that right through the talk. But some of these are a very interesting read. So, as many of you would know, Richard and I have been monitoring koalas in the Bluff Forest for near Wandekla for over 2 years now, and I've worked on koalas for many years down south. The koalas up here are different. Not only are they smaller, they've got much shorter coat, they've got a very pale grey coat. They're solitary, as are the koalas in the south, but these guys are in really low abundance. We don't exactly know what that is. It's probably less than 1 koala to the square kilometre. It may even be as low as 1 koala per 10 square kilometres. There are patches of high abundance, and where there is a wind farm proposed in the Upper Burdekin, that was a really abundant koala population. We might be looking at a sink source. We're not exactly sure how koala populations work, even at this late stage. There's been a lot of work done on koalas in the last 20 odd years. But it might be in productive areas where the koalas, the females are getting enough to remain in good condition to breed. That's the source, constant supply. A lot of animal species have this sort of model. They disperse out into lower abundance. So the broad picture is a few breeding populations, yet a widespread population at low abundance. Might be something like that going on. There hasn't been any work done this far north, so we're not really sure what we're dealing with. They're strictly nocturnally active, and when I say that, I mean they usually don't move out of their daytime roost until maybe 10 o'clock at night. They might get to a tree late in their nocturnal wanderings, about 4 or 5 a.m. They might move into that tree and they'll stay there for the next 16 hours. At night, when they do all their moving, they're highly mobile, During the breeding season, they'll easily walk 1.5 kilometres at night. And this is not what we're led to believe. We're led to believe koalas are quite a slothful animal. These are not such. They are extremely active. And they're all, during their daytime roosts, they're very cryptic. They're very hard to see. They usually choose a tree like pink bloodwood, which has got a fairly thick canopy compared to some of their food trees, and they're very hard to see. I mean, we know where they are. We've got sat tags on them, and we sometimes walk around the tree for 10 minutes before we find the thing. So the net result of this is they're seldom seen. I mean, there are property owners out there in the bluff who have lived there for 60 years and never seen a koala. And our koalas with tags on have been through their properties. They're very cryptic. So their biology is poorly known, and most of the EISs that were done on the proposed wind farm sites missed out on koalas because they didn't look hard enough and they didn't know how to look. And it was very convenient for them not to have koalas as a species where they were going to put wind farms. So how this works in low abundance, we've always known the koala bellow had something to do with their biology, but it really stands out how it works in a low abundance population. The males bellow quite frequently, particularly during the breeding season. They might bellow about hour length all night through the breeding season. And there's a contact going on with, they're advertising their presence. Sometimes other males will respond to a koala and there may be some interaction. We think it attracts the females. We've got some evidence from down south that females will actually come to males rather than the males will pursue them. The male stays put and the female comes to them. So the mating success of the population in low abundance really depends on that bellow. It's a very important part of their biology in a low abundance population. It's a very low frequency bellow, and the point of that is low frequency sound is not attenuated by forest. It'll just go straight through it. So a koala will, if it hears a sound, it knows where that animal is. It's not deflected or anything like that. It can locate the animal. And it goes for a long way. The lower the frequency gets, the further it goes. And I won't get ahead of myself. All right, not surprisingly, they show major adaptations to both produce and to hear low frequency sound. They have novel structures in the larynx. They call them velar vocal folds. They're just little sort of tissue folds which vibrate at very low frequency. So using that, they can make calls down to 15 hertz. I mean, that may not sound much if you're not used to talking in hertz. I've become used to talking in hertz, but let me tell you a story about African elephants. Probably the most studied animal which produces low frequency contact calls is the African elephant. And they produce rumbles. Those rumbles are an 8 hertz sound. And in the appropriate climatic conditions, like you get a lot of temperature inversions in Africa. So elephants are usually rumbling around dusk when there's often hot air over cold air, and that. In that situation, I mean, sound travels a lot further through cold, moist air, and it sort of deflects off the hot air above it. So the distances they hear elephants, they've studied this. This has been going on for probably 30 years, the elephant studies. But elephants are in contact with other elephants, sometimes over 300 square kilometres, which is hard to believe, but they've done a lot of work. We don't know with koalas, but for an African elephant is probably 6 tonne. It's got a 2.5 metre trunk, so it's a big, powerful animal. it can produce that noise. The koala is 8 kilograms. So for an 8 kilogram animal to produce a 15 hertz noise is quite remarkable. The power of natural selection. Okay, there are a couple of references on this too. This is by Ben Charlton. It really describes how they did this work. It got a lot of publicity at the time. It was only about 2015 that they started to look closely at koala bellows. The instrumentation that you could study noise and vocalisations with improved a lot over the last 20 years. So that's quite an interesting read if you're so disposed. And if you're interested in the elephant story, Michael Garstein's paper. It's an old paper now, but they did a heck of a lot of work in Africa just trying to work out what this rumbling was about. They could never figure out how elephants, even when they were coming in to drink, early evening, how they managed to all assemble into a big mob and then come in as a big mob just to be safe from predators. They were in contact. They never knew how they knew low frequency sounds. The other adaptation is to the hearing apparatus. They have a very large auditory bullae, and that large auditory bullae are seen in many groups as an adaptation for very sensitive to low frequency sound. This skull comes off the banks of the Ainsley River, about 330 km from the Gulf. So that's how far north koalas go. These are the tympanic bulla. They're quite a huge structure. I've never seen bulla. Well, I mean, I must have handled koala skulls for about 25 years before I even knew what these things were. You never see them in other mammal skulls. It's quite an extraordinary thing. You get an even better impression of how big these things are. We didn't chop up any koalas. This is just a cat skin. So there's a huge cavity. So there's this cavity in the tympanic cavity, which we're looking at in these tympanic bullae. But there are also epitympanic recesses, and they're all connected together. I mean, this is the brain case here. So you see a huge area of the skull, a huge volume of the skull, is devoted to low frequency hearing. The paleontologists are the only people who've really taken an interest in this. The work of Julian Lewis, who's now at Griffith University. He did the work at University of New South Wales with Michael Archer. But he considered it, he looked at 20-million-year-old skulls, acid etched out of limestones at Riversley, and compared them with modern koalas. So this is 20 million years of natural selection. And his thought was that it was a response to Australia going north, the drying, the thinning out of the eucalypt forest. Koalas had to communicate and keep touch with each other over much larger distances. So it's probably something like that. We were completely unconscious to it down south because of the abundance of koalas was so high. I mean, we had abundances of 3 or 5 animals to the hectare, but that is really an artefact of Europeans clearing the land. It's an artefact of a whole lot of things, but it's an artificially high abundance for koalas. I think what we're seeing here is probably more like the natural situation with koalas, low abundance. So as koalas show major adaptation for both making and with hearing low frequency sound, I'd like to suggest, or take that little leap, to suggest they probably hear much lower frequencies than we do. Our hearing goes down to 20 hertz. these guys can make noises down to 15 hertz. They may even go a bit lower than that. And, 15 hertz sound in moist, still air will travel a long way. We can, in good conditions, we can hear koalas about 800 metres. Most of the time, in normal conditions, we're hearing koalas maybe 200 to 400 metres. How far they can hear each other, we don't know. We had a situation down south once, back in the 80s, which we couldn't explain. A female found a male from 3.5 kilometres away. We knew we had radios on them, we knew where they all were. She was 3.5 kilometres. She moved 3.5 kilometres. He didn't move much at all. We caught her again 6 weeks later. She had a new house show. She'd made it. So maybe they can hear each other kilometre and a half. Maybe, like elephants, wait for the right conditions when there's an inversion to do their bellowing, to contact, and maybe koalas have some tricks like that. We haven't worked on them long enough looking from this point of view, using acoustic recorders to try to really understand how the population works. And so this is the article by Julian Lewis. It's a very interesting read. The paleontology at the start is a bit heavy, but the discussion about what sort of conditions he thought would have been. So there was so much selective pressure to have really long range hearing. So it's quite an interesting read, the discussion on the what paleontology means, right? Okay, so this brings us to bioacoustic recorders. They're widely used by biologists now for censusing. They've got quite a sensitive microphone. That's a 20 hertz microphone. It goes down to probably the base of our hearing, probably not down to the lowest point in koalas' hearing. A bunch of batteries, a bunch of SD cards. You can leave them out. You can program them to record dawn and dusk, all night, all day, whatever. You can program them and go back to the lab. We then what we do, we take the SD cards out, we put them in a computer, we turn it into a sonogram, and you can scan sonograms very quickly, looking for, each animal has a distinct pattern of call, and you can recognise birds. You can even recognise individuals. If you listen to the same group of animals enough, you'll recognise distinctive calls. The other thing what we're trying to do with them is we can, with a group of 3 of these, if you get the same call, you can work out time of arrival differences. You've got a GPS clock on board, and the GPS clock is accurate to 6 decimal places of a second, so you can get a very fine time difference. And on using 3 recorders, you can get a location, and that's what we're trying to do. Because we're having so much trouble finding koalas, but we know they're there, we're hearing them, we're seeing lots of scratching on trees, we just can't find them, can't usually find them. So we'll, the presence-absence studies, most of that is going on further north. So around here, we're really trying to work on a population and get an idea of how this population works. Further north, we don't know how far north koalas go. Recorded in Cooktown in the late 1930s, recorded Mount Carbine about 2013, recorded around Mareeba occasionally. There's a lot of good habitat up there. There's a lot of blue gums along rivers. They must be there, but they're in such low abundance, and there's so few people wandering around, and they're so hard to see. We don't know how far north they go. We don't know whether they're on the Windsor Tableland. And the Windsor Tableland being a high elevation, wet, sclerophyll, grassy woodland, a very important place for the long-term conservation of koalas. And the best way to go with that is to use these things. It's a lot of staring at we're getting more and more into using, using a call describer and just using the computer to search the records to find the animals we're looking for. So it's getting, and that's why it's becoming such a popular survey technique. You pay the people to go out and put the recorders out, and you pay them to analyse them. If you can get them to analyse them, you have to master the software. So we're just going to bring Richard into the act now, and we'll talk about some of the sonograms we've taken of Athy and why we think there are issues with low frequency sound from wind turbines. So if you're not used to looking at a sonogram, a sonogram is really just it's just a visual presentation of a sound field. So down the vertical axis is frequency in hertz. That's in kilohertz on this one. Bottom axis is just time of day, time since start of period of that. The colour, and ignore, this top bit is just another part of it. It's really just a plot of against, it's actually signal strength against time, amplitude against time. On the lower sonogram, amplitude is represented by colour. So red is, intense amplitude, that's the highest level. Blue-black is no amplitude, no sound. So and there's a lot on this. What we've been doing in trying to find other animals is we've been setting the acoustic recorders near one of our known animals and just trying to pick up. When koalas bellow, they often elicit a response from another koala. There's a bit of duetting goes on. So rather than us going out in the bush with playback situations where we've got a record of a koala and we're trying to find them, we're just putting an acoustic recorder or several acoustic recorders near one koala. So this is the legendary Athy again. Yeah, okay. So the first call we'll listen to is Athy. So you can see it's a sort of an inhale, exhale sort of sound. It's mainly, it's about, goes from the floor from 0 up to about 2.53 kilohertz. And yeah, that's about 10 metres from the recorder, so it's very loud. The next thing is just a brush-tailed possum that obviously got annoyed with Athy vocalising. He's not impressed. But what we're really interested in are the distant calls, the faint calls. And so if we go up here, this is a distant koala call. And it's mainly about, the peak frequency is about 650 hertz. There's a little bit of high frequency stuff, but if you just here. So the elephant in the room here is the green band along the bottom. There's always, this is low frequency, this is all below about 200 hertz. I mean, when you're out, when you're using recorders, there's always a bit of a band of rubbish along the bottom. Your microphone only goes down to, well, the song meter microphones go down to 80 hertz, ours go down to 20 hertz. Microphones start to fall away once they go below their targeted frequency, so you just get a bit of rubbish down there. If there's wind or there's thunder or stuff, you'll just get a bit of noise. But we're 10 kilometres from the wind farm here, and we were getting this noise, and then we started to look a little bit closer at it. So. It's like a very low rumble. It's a constant rumble. It's not, if it was winded, it'd be varying, but we were picking it up all over the place, and we finally concluded that it's the wind farm. We can hear it from 10 kilometres. The point I wanted to make, we've only got these more distant calls. They're probably only 100 or 200 metres away. But already all of the high frequencies have peeled off. So what happens when sound passes through foliage of that, all of the high frequencies get attenuated. And the further you get from the source, the more you just get low frequency. So we've had koalas, we picked them up from 350 metres, I think it's about 3, and that call is only about 300 hertz. It's only a little bit higher than that, and we know even further out it'll mask it. We won't hear the koalas, and what is true for us is true for other koalas. So when you've got a wind farm around and two koalas are calling and they're a kilometre apart or something, they won't hear it. So it'll be masked, and we try and demonstrate it with. Well, I mean, we can do, if we run this one, you can see that's a very loud call, and it almost gets absorbed by the background noise. We're getting a bit more of the koala call in that. What I was getting playing on the other system, the koala call and the low frequency rumble from the wind farm just blend into the same sort of noise. It's not hard to know. I mean, if we listen to this one, we probably can't hear any koala at all. It's not a convincing demonstration. We're trying to get too much technology. But the point is, a distant call, we know from experiences, it'll just poke out the top of this noise band, and we probably won't hear it. And we're also interpreting that as if a distant koala won't hear another koala. We think. I mean, if you do a 10-kilometre radius around a wind farm, you're looking at a hell of a lot of the habitat there, which is probably not going to be particularly suitable for koalas. They're going to have locating other animals is important in the breeding season. If they can't locate other animals, the breeding rate might drop a bit. It doesn't augur well for the population. All right, we can go on to the next one. So what we did after this was really to convince ourselves it really is this bloody wind farm. Let's go and put a recorder near the wind farm and see what that sounds like. So we did that, and this is we've got a slightly We go up to 20 hertz on the vertical scale. We're only going up to about 8 hertz, but all of the settings are the same. So the colours mean the same sort of thing. What these bands are insect, we can just, the one higher up is another insect called. But the noise of interest is this red line. The reason we selected 1.5 kilometres because in the State Code 23, which is the Queensland law, which really permitted wind farms to be built in these areas with minimum environmental impact studies of that, State Code 23 stipulates that wind turbines be at least 1.5 kilometres away from sensitive land use. So sensitive land use is all sorts of human occupations. It doesn't mention protected area. It doesn't mention wildlife. We don't think that koalas will persist in an area like this. An animal with very sensitive low frequency hearing in an area where low frequency sound is really intense, we doubt whether they'll persist. So that's, once again, there's a big noise footprint around a wind farm. And what also happens in wind farms is that they're always going on about they're clearing minimum habitat. They're only clearing habitat for their trackways, which are quite wide because they have to put an 85 metre blade on the back of a truck and drive it through. So they're very wide tracks. The pads are quite deep. They need to dig a big hole and put a lot of concrete in the ground to support a 225 metre wind tower. But they're suggesting that the bush they don't clear is offset, the term offset. It's a big thing in conservation these days. We're going to clear that beautiful piece of habitat, but we're going to offset it. We're going to give you this in return. The assumption being it's habitat of equal value. These guys are saying the land we don't clear around the wind farm, pretty much like on that first slide. Some of this bush around them they'll be claiming as an offset. So all of that land will have really high intensity, low frequency sound. I don't think koalas will use it. I think their suggestion that that is an offset is complete rubbish. Yeah. All right, so I don't understand the logic at all about offsets. Whichever way you add it up, there is a net loss of habitat. It's just rubbish. Yeah. All right, so the impacts of low frequency noise on koalas, what I'm suggesting is there's reduced contact distance. It's not going to do anything to help the population. It might cause a decline in breeding success. And we don't at this stage know whether there's chlamydia in these populations. That will already be suppressing fertility. If they've got chlamydia plus this, well, it's another one of the 1,000 cuts that'll push them to extinction. So they shouldn't be doing this here. The noise footprint of wind farms, they're not talking about that. They're talking as if the sound stops at the front gate. The sound does not stop at the front gate. The sound goes for another 10 or 15 kilometres. And their value, what they're putting up as offset, I think, is highly questionable. I don't think that it... And we also, I mean, Animals use their ears for a lot of things. They, you know, it's often contact calls. It's like koalas are using them, probably finding mates, to find predators. And there are a lot of mammals in that country. There are a lot of birds in that country. We pick up a lot of frogs on the recorders. It's not just koalas. It's pretty much all of the wildlife in there is jeopardised by high intensity, low frequency sound. And I don't think, well, I mean, just to read you another thing from State Code 23, they have these performance outcomes, and that performance outcome 1 stipulates that development be designated and cited to ensure threatened species and associated habitats and areas of high environmental value are protected from adverse impacts. So what is wind farm noise if it's not an adverse impact? So this is I got this from Steve Malkowski again. This is Calgary Herald about the 15th of March this year. So in Calgary, the Alberta government has sent a draft map to the wind farm industry showing them where renewable energy projects will and won't be allowed. And there's a 35-kilometre setback from the Rockies. Exactly. Wouldn't you think the Queensland government could have thought of something like that?